Oh, okay, I see how it is. I'm about to do a video about atheism versus agnosticism, and of course my intro has to try to kill me. Is it because this subject is like the dark territory that nobody wants to talk about? Like, seriously, I think because of Steve McRae, who is a friend of mine. So when I say this, it comes from a place of love, but I think because of Steve, this topic has become one of those issues that as soon as you bring it up, everybody starts dipping into their tribalism.
I'm not sure it's tribalism. Steve's just a bit of an arrogant jackass. Let's do this. BionicDance! Greetings, fellow space travelers, BionicDance here. I really hate having to respond to a member of the atheist community, but it's true that on the subject of atheism versus agnosticism, there are definitely two camps that are rabid and screaming regarding their position. We've got a fellow atheist here trying to bridge that divide, but Cirrus, I love you, man, but I think you flubbed this one.
So, let me go ahead and get some things out of the way first before we tackle this subject. Whatever label you find suits you best, use it. I don't care. Nobody cares. The people who do care don't matter, effectively reducing the amount of people who matter back down to people who don't care. Next.
Here's the problem with that statement, and you even touch on this yourself, kind of disagreeing with yourself a little bit. Words are tools of communication, and if we don't use the same terms, or if someone's terms don't allow for enough nuance to truly describe one's own position, then communicating is the one thing we won't be doing. And, as I mentioned later, I believe that some of the people who insist on certain terms are doing so dishonestly, for underhanded reasons.
So, let's go ahead and define some terms so that we can go ahead and hop into the hot, boiling, murky water. We're going to start using some philosophical definitions, so we're going to be using the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. We're going to be covering two arguments here, the argument from philosophical academia and the argument from etymology. So, let's start with the term agnostic. Agnostic, or agnosticism, were coined in the 19th century by the English biologist T.H. Huxley. He invented the word agnostic to denote people who, like himself, confess themselves to be hopelessly ignorant concerning a variety of matters. This would mean that you can be agnostic on any position, not just the position of God belief.
And I couldn't agree with that definition more. It's always been a tiny source of cognitive dissonance for me that agnosticism is almost exclusively applied to the topic of religion in common use. The lacking sufficient information definition of agnostic is, to me, the best possible use of the term, and that's the point. That definition is useful in ways that other definitions are not, or at least not as much.
However, here's the thing about Huxley. He didn't define agnosticism as just the state of being agnostic. He specifically coined it to be the normative position, also known as the default position. This will come into play later. Under Huxley's usage, an agnostic is a person who has entertained the proposition of whether or not there's a God, but believes that it is neither true nor false. So if God either exists or he doesn't, an agnostic would sit in the middle and say that they don't know whether he exists or he doesn't.
And this is where I do start to disagree just a little. I 100% agree that agnosticism is the default position. Nobody starts with knowledge. Where I disagree is the part about having entertained the position. If agnosticism is the default position, then nothing is required to hold it. Indeed, holding may be a bad description. Being in a state of lacking knowledge is a possibility, as well as knowingly acknowledging one's own ignorance on a topic.
We've pretty much covered everything I want to talk about on agnosticism, so we're now going to move to the definition of atheism as per philosophical literature, at least the most widely accepted of it. Atheism, philosophically, is always defined in terms of theism. It refers to the propositional content of belief, not the psychological state of believing. There are only two possible answers to whether or not God or gods exist, either yes or no.
And that is where we start to get into the bullshit pulled by the people who prefer this definition of atheism. Because it is so black or white, it doesn't allow for any nuance on the topic. For example, it doesn't allow one to discuss a specific God. There is no way to say, that God doesn't exist, at least not as described, and here are the facts that contradict the claims made by the theist for that specific God, and I am undecided with regard to other gods. And I have had that lack of nuance used against me by certain people who shall remain nameless.
And atheism, philosophically, is the answer of no. This is because theism is the proposition that God exists. Therefore, atheism, as the opposite of theism, would be the proposition that God does not exist. It is, in philosophy, a positive statement.
Which it shouldn't be, and here are some very damn good reasons why. First, Nobody would even be discussing the topic if the existence of a God wasn't proposed in the first place. So second, making a statement about a God's non-existence can only be a response to a claim of a God's existence, even if only tangentially so. Third, it's an unfalsifiable statement. You can't prove that something doesn't exist. To prove that claim, the necessary evidence would have to be all of existence itself, and even then, well, who knows? Unlike claiming that a God exists, which can potentially be proved, claiming a God does not exist cannot. And this is why I say that insisting upon this definition is sneaky and underhanded. The way I've seen it used is for theists to insist that atheists have a burden of proof, that atheists are making a positive claim, that their own beliefs aren't the only ones that should be challenged. It's a way of taking the heat off of themselves, getting out from under the spotlight. And no amount of telling them that I just don't believe in any gods, that I haven't been given sufficient evidence to think such a creature is real, seems to dissuade them from what they think is a knockout punch. These philosophical definitions don't really give the atheist the opportunity to say, prove it, don't really give the agnostic position more punch to make it seem less wishy-washy, which it's not, but these definitions don't really give me the necessary nuance to say so, to succinctly describe my full position on the matter without essentially strawmanning myself. Whenever someone insists on only yes or no answers to questions, I know they're up to something sneaky.
But oh, there are different types of gods, you might say. Well, that's why there's a distinction between global atheism and local atheism. Local atheism would be the belief that particular gods do not exist. So for instance, Yahweh, the God of the Bible. Or you could simply say that all gods that have been conceived by men are not real. Basically, local atheism just has a version of God in their head that they disbelieve in. This is a very easy position to justify, mainly because you have a concept of God to work with, and you can use that as a starting point to point out the issues that you have with those particular types of gods.
Right, but good luck getting that distinction into a discussion. This is great in theory, but in practice, if you try to point out that your atheism is local, you'll run up against the attempt to pin you to the global atheist wall regardless. This is why I don't think that the you have your definitions and I have mine position is a good one, because how people use the words will often affect the arguments they will make and accept. It makes conversation more difficult, not less, because some people are, let's face it, complete dishonest dickheads. If our definitions are more descriptive and allow for more nuance, then it'll keep us more honest. Not completely, of course, but it'll be more difficult to make someone say something they don't mean.
Under the common parlance colloquial definition of atheism, a lack of belief in God and a disbelief in a God are fundamentally equal. I do not believe and I believe not, which are normally very different positions, under the colloquial definition of atheism are basically the same.
Since when? If I know any self-identified atheist who uses those interpretations, they've managed to not make themselves known. I myself, and most of those I've known who use the colloquial definition, use the term atheist as an all-encompassing bubble, a broad category that includes all states of non-belief without making a specific claim. I've heard some people try to claim that this isn't a useful definition specifically because it isn't specific enough, but I think that this makes it more useful. It's like saying that the term rock and roll isn't useful because it doesn't just mean metal. Never mind that there is punk rock, soft rock, psychedelic rock, alternative rock. Never mind that there are different kinds of metal, death metal, hair metal, speed metal, glam metal, butt rock, etc. And I'm pretty sure some of those are the same thing, but you get the idea. Non-belief and active disbelief are both different flavors of atheism, the way that, say, space opera and hard SF are different flavors of science fiction. But treating those different subgenres as being the same is just as unrealistic as expecting atheism to be a laser beam pinpoint on positively asserting that there is no God.
This is why the hyphenated versions of atheism have come about in recent years, the agnostic atheist or the gnostic atheist. Under philosophical usage, these terms are utter freaking nonsense, as they are two completely separate positions, so hyphenating them together makes absolutely no sense. However, under common parlance, gnosis refers to knowledge of spiritual mysteries, so agnosis or agnostic would be a lack of knowledge in spiritual mysteries. And if an atheism is somebody who just lacks lacks a belief, then somebody who lacks knowledge and lacks a belief in a god would be an agnostic atheist. Someone who purports to know that there is no god, therefore they have a knowledge of spiritual mysteries, and finds themselves under the colloquial usage of atheist, would make themselves out to be a gnostic atheist. Note in the comparison that this is basically just the atheist position in philosophy, but under common parlance, because the terms are less precise, they do need to be hyphenated.
And that's why the philosophical definitions aren't the best for discussing these topics, because it only gives us black or white definitions, while the colloquial definitions give us more of a spectrum of belief and non-belief. The colloquial definitions give us the ability to be more precise, and you'd think that'd be a benefit to any philosophical discussion. Furthermore, it doesn't allow for the concepts of Gnostic or agnostic theism, the mere belief in a god versus having knowledge of a god's existence. And then we get to my favorite word, because I made it the hell up, apistivist, which addresses the lack of faith, or more specifically, the refusal to use faith as a method of reaching conclusions. Using apistivist and agnostic as adjectives to describe why one is an atheist makes a person's position better known to the other side, where the philosophical insistence on black or white does not. This is why I, at least, advocate for ditching the philosophical definitions. As I've said, I've had people who insist on those yes or no concepts try to trap me into saying things I don't mean. And I can see where those conversations are going. We'll hit some tipping point where they'll say that if I believe X and Y are so, then I also have to think Z is so. But if I thought that X or Y is only so under certain circumstances, or that only half of X is so while the other is bogus, I will not have been given the chance to say so. And when I try to clarify why I don't think that Z is so, I'll be accused of backpedaling, hypocrisy, or moving the goalposts. So again, saying that it's okay for people to have and be using their own definitions while seemingly nice and tolerant actually harms discussion and debate.
I'm going to go ahead and throw a footnote here real quick that atheism and theism have literally nothing to do with religion. There are people who have a God belief who don't have a religion, and there are people who have a religion without a God belief. One is a philosophical conversation, the other one is a, well, religious conversation.
Agreed. And I only go after theism because it's probably difficult to justify being religious once the God belief goes away. And I only go after religion because so many religious people make nuisances of themselves. If they could share and play nicely with the other kids, this channel would be all about my animation work as I'd originally intended. Sometimes I regret not making a new channel with a different name to talk about religion. The name BionicDance was supposed to be the name of my animation company if I ever had one that was more than just me. On that topic, by the way, stop putting a space between Bionic and Dance if you're writing my channel name. It's all one word with 2 capital letters. Seriously, not kidding.
Well, what's the real meaning of atheism? What's the real meaning of agnostic? Funny thing is that words don't actually have meanings. Words are just symbols that we assign value to. That is to say that words have usage. So it really depends on what your usage is. If I'm talking philosophically, my usage of the term agnostic is going to be fairly precise and apply to me. But if I'm having normal, everyday conversation, then my usage of the term atheist is a little more loose and therefore now applies to me just fine. I'm flexible and am willing to use both. Someone like Steve prefers to utilize the more philosophical definition. And you know what? That's okay.
Actually, it's not okay. Remember when I was talking about people who've tried to trap me with yes or no questions, black or white definitions? Yeah, guess who was one of those jokers? He might be 2 of them. Not numerically, that's just how much of a wank he's been. One of the reasons I am vehemently opposed to the philosophical definitions is specifically because of his dishonest chicanery with black or white, yes or no questions and definitions, as I was describing before with the whole XYZ thing. So no, it's not okay. When definitions are used as weapons instead of helping us understand each other, no, it's very, very not okay.
Both of these positions are valid, and here's why. As long as you and your interlocutor know what you mean by which terms you're using, then there's no reason to argue about which terms you're using.
Honestly, that sounds reasonable, but it's not feasible. It's unrealistic. If we're constantly translating in our head what the other person has said, and they're doing the same for us, all because we're using different ways of saying the same thing, there are gonna be screw-ups and miscommunications. It's just plain unavoidable. And definitions can affect worldviews. I'm having a debate, discussion, argument, whatever, right now with a homophobe about what it means to be homosexual. All he can picture in his head is guys having butt sex, with no room in his head for love, romance, family, lesbians, etc. In his mind, being LGBT means boys fucking, and that's it. That's the definition of homosexual. And try though I might, I can't get him to see how much more there is to it, the nuance. And it's the same with some of the more rabid and screaming proponents of the philosophical definitions. The idea of an agnostic atheist who might lean closer to belief without doing it, and the agnostic atheist who leans further toward non-belief without declaring there is no God, are ideas that tend to get swept under the rug, at least in my experience, because the philosophical terms are so black or white, and they seem to prefer it that way. But unlike the philosophical definitions, their ideas can still be expressed colloquially while allowing for more range, a wider spectrum of belief and non-belief. Frankly, the colloquial definition is more tolerant and allows for greater clarity, and that's why it should be the norm. Of course, this is all in my own experience. Maybe it's different for others, but as I see it, the philosophical definitions are far more problematic.
So, with this video ending, with me firing shots at both sides, I'm gonna go ahead and sign off. Hopefully I'll see you guys at Faithless Forum, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
I will also be at Faithless Forum, but despite that, you should probably go anyway. Also, yeah, I'm disagreeing with Surus today, but that's pretty rare. Go show him some love, subscribe to his channel, and tell him I sent you. You know, 'cause, attention horror alert, I totally want the credit. Until next time, fellow space travelers, this is BionicDance saying don't run on automatic. Instead, please think. Here's the problem with that statement, and you even oh, my nose, fuck. Here's the problem with that statement, and you even touch on this yourself, kind of agreeing with yourself. Or disagreeing. Fuck. It's always been a tiny source of cognitive dissonance for me that agnosticism is almost exclusively applied to the pocket. Being in a state of lacking information is a possibility, as well as knowingly acknowledging one's own ignorance. First, nobody would. First, nobody, fucking hell, Kate. And making a statement about a god's non-existence can only be a response to a claim of a god's existence, even if only tangentially even if only tangentially fuck! Stop putting a space between Bionic and Dance if you're writing my channel name. It's all one... Damn it.
Attention citizens. Failure to contribute will result in suspended oxygen privileges. Attention citizens. Failure to contribute will result in suspended oxygen privileges. Attention citizens.
You're still here? It's over. Rate the video, subscribe, and close the window. Go.